Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. Today, I'm continuing with this show. We're going to continue laying out the evidence in the academics that document how public health, the academic literature that documents how public health, as a systems approach, a Marxian systems approach, came to dominate public health as we know it worldwide, including in the United States. And, the One Health that has been, it's been adopted, it's been signed on to by every agency in the American government, pretty much. If there's one that hasn't signed on to it, I would be surprised. But the United States government, federal, state, local, our government agencies, public health agencies, our medical schools, our science, the whole of academia have all signed on to it. The critical theories, which is another aspect of the systems approach assault on America as founded, the deconstruction of America as founded, an assault on a revolution against, collectivist revolution against what America's individual, unalienable, natural, endowed by a creator rights and liberty actually are, that are enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and secured in the Constitution. This whole systems approach, including public health, including, again, like I said, the critical theories, pedagogy, and curricula that are all of our kids are being taught K through 12. It's all part of the pedagogy of K through 12 education now. The whole of academia. There's nowhere we can escape it. We can't escape it. Left or right politics, we can't escape it. And it's pretty much come to be everything that we know and understand today is basically fundamentally premised on collectivist philosophy, progressive collectivist understandings from the perspective of the progressive collectivism undermining or targeting America's founding principles or America as founded, our republic, for destruction. It's become one and the same with the American mindset. That's why politics really isn't the answer. If you're going into politics trying to push back against the collectivism of any of these things, whether it's windmills, solar panels, sustainable development, the net zero, climate change narratives, public health narratives, which are all the same. They're all intertwined. The intersectionality of it all. It's all one collectivism, all one web, all one malevolent show. It's all the same. But we're going to continue going down and documenting these academic literature that shows that I'm not just making this shit up. It's documented history. This whole in the 1950s, polio, mass vaccinations. Not just polio, but other epidemics. Pretty much wherever there's an epidemic or there's an emergent zootonic jump of some freaking pathogen or a virus, novel pathogen or virus that there's right with it. It doesn't come without the push for the public population health that first became the envy of the world during the 1950s. Stalin era, Khrushchev era, Brezhnev era, 50s and 60s or whatever, Soviet Union, and the expansion as the communization of the world was happening, the communization of Hungary, the communization of the Soviet states, the communization of the Eastern Bloc countries, the communization of the world through the internationalist and cosmopolitan, what they called the cosmopolitanism or scientific internationalism pre-World War I, that also, it's not just the whole systems approach worked in the whole civil rights movement of the 1960s. The 1960s civil rights movement. Was that civil rights movement, again, like I've asked before, was it a push for the constitutionally obligated recognition by the government of our individual rights and liberty? Or was it a push for the government to be the provider of additional civil rights, human rights of civil human origin? Do you see what I'm saying? Because the latter, the civil human rights of civil human origin, are not our natural rights. They're positive rights deemed by or sourced from our government. The governments are obligated under the world socialism of human rights to provide, or as the Declaration of Human Rights says, rights, liberty, security of person, versus what our Declaration of Independence said, rights, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, security of person is what the Declaration of Human Rights says. They're unalienable rights and liberty in our Declaration of Independence, unalienable. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which is property. You have to have property. You have to be able to have the free exchange of property owned for property desired, so that you can have a pathway to some kind of prosperity, personal prosperity, to which you will be enabled to pursue an independent happiness. Without that free exchange of property owned or property for property desired, which is free enterprise, which is capitalism, which has been under assault by collectivism. Because you can't have an independent people and a totalitarian top-down command and control government at the same time. It doesn't work. And this is where we are. And I'm trying to document this history for you, get it out there so that you can see it. And we're just going to continue that today here. Let me see, where are we? Oops. Sorry. Hang on. I got to do this. There we go. Can you see that? There we go. I'm just figuring this shit out, right? I'm working on it. It's a cold December morning out here today, mid-December 2025, or December 11th, 2025. Yesterday was Human Rights Day. It was on my calendar, Human Rights Day. I couldn't believe it. But that's where we are. That's where we are. It's on our calendars now. Okay? And December 10th, Human Rights Day. But anyway, we left off at the last show here. We're going to do this vaccination in communist state polio in Eastern Europe. We kind of went down through a lot of this article on the last show because I wanted to go down through it so that you can see, one, I'm not making this shit up, and two, see how it gets laid out in the history from a humanities professor out of a socialist pushing universities in UK and Germany, right? This is, again, that Dora Varga, same article that we were going over the other day. We say, you see your humanities profile here. Medical humanities, okay? We kind of went over this a little bit. Or her socialist medicine profile. It says socialist, above this here it says socialist medicine. It says socialist medicine. Yeah. Socialistmedicine.com. That's where that profile is. But This article came out again in 2018, which is not really that long ago, but it was before COVID. Before COVID became the prime example of contemporary push for this whole, novel zootonic jump, epidemiology, vaccinology, virology that all kind of got launched under the Soviet Union in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Right? In December of 1959, like we talked about in Hungary already, you know what I mean? We already talked about this whole article down through there. I showed you what was happening in Hungary in 1959, how the communists were basically, they had their the jackboot thugs, and they were just basically stepping on Hungary and all the other communist Soviet Union states too, right? But we didn't get to the conclusion. I didn't read the conclusion, and here I got the conclusion written out, and I kind of want to go down through the conclusion on this, just to bring this kind of just to round it out, So I got the conclusion. For the relatively young communist governments, polio pitted specific challenges to ideas of state paternalism, which permeated healthcare policies in a decade that was burdened by Cold War thaws and frosts and revolutions. The stakes did not only regard the health of the population and epidemic control, but also the strength and capability of the new communist system. So now you got the health of population, health, public health, same shit, right? Epidemic control, same shit, as it applies to the strength and capabilities of the new communist system. The new communist system, they're always promoting the new communist man. Everything's going to be in the future, no matter how it sucks now. We're all working towards the future of the new communist man. It's going to be out there, new communist society. Again, you want to know what life was like even up and into the 1970s in Soviet Russia. This book right here, this guy right here, his name is, Belenko? Yeah, Lieutenant Belenko. Victor Belenko, I think was his name. He flew his MiG-25. He flew his MiG-25, I think. It was, MiG-25 to Japan in 1975. I think it was 1975 or 76. September 6, 1976. Yeah, I was a freshman in high school. Yeah, freshman in high school, like the first couple days, because I remember when that happened. But this book right here, he'll tell you the mindset in the communist propaganda and the way people were living. He puts it right out there, and how his whole life experience and how he became a pilot and all the Kool-Aid he had to drink and everything else that's going on. Everybody else has to drink, and the everybody this. The environment that everybody's living in, everybody's, the jobs that everybody has that they're appointed to, and the whole way of life that is surrounded by that top-down command and control, and how it affects people's mental and spiritual well-being. Gotta read that book. I highly recommend this book. It is what it is. But anyways, it kind of plays in here because all these things and the realities of a communist top-down command and control society are all playing out while all these disease and epidemics are supposedly going on that they have vaccines for, right? And mass vaccinations and in the public health, right? But anyways. The stakes did not only regard the health of populations and epidemic controls, but also the strength and capabilities of the new communist system and the new communist man. Both East and West shared the perception of what the communist state was and its ideal role in the polio prevention. Both East and West shared the perception of what the communist state was and its ideal role in the polio prevention. Following the appearance and successful application of live polio viruses, Eastern European states saw themselves as particularly suited to achieve effectiveness in curbing and eradicating, okay, polio through their part in vaccine development and its distribution. The West, while not endorsing such political regimes ideologically, sorry, I'll learn how to talk maybe someday. Yeah, the West, while not endorsing such political regimes ideologically, agreed. They didn't endorse them ideologically, but they agreed. Indeed, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland became pioneers in introducing, testing, and applying live polio vaccines in a mass scale, while their Eastern European peers were quick to follow in mass vaccinations. From a broader geopolitical perspective, polio raised uncomfortable questions about the positive side of communist regimes. The positive side of communist regimes, i.e., effective epidemic control. All right? In a short time came to symbolize neutral science. So there it is. Came to symbolize a neutral science that broke the barriers between East and West. The central top-down command and control, the positives, these epidemic controls of communist regimes came to be symbolize the neutral science. Positive, the communist regimes, okay, the polio vaccine, mass vaccinations, effective epidemic control of the communist regimes in a short time came to symbolize neutral science that broke the barriers between East and West. The top-down organization of vaccine trial organization and immunization, which was at the time seen as particularly communist and East European, also came to be seen as the most effective way to eradicate polio on a global scale. And this communism of top-down organized vaccine trial organization and immunization, which at the time was seen as a particularly communist and Eastern European thing. The top-down organization of vaccine trial organization and immunization, which was at the time seen as particularly communist and Eastern European, also came to be seen as the most effective way to eradicate polio on a global scale, which was then translated to eradicating any and every emerging novel virus. They're still pushing it today. You don't see an emerging novel virus or a pandemic or epidemic anywhere, or endogenous freaking, epidemics. You don't see it anywhere without it being accompanied by a push for the collectivism or communism of a top-down organization of vaccine trial and of the communism, the particularly communist tools. In short, what they're saying is what I'm getting out of it is that this whole public health thing, this whole mass vaccination thing, this top-down command and control public health is communist, flat out communist. That was recognized as communist then, though soon came to be seen as neutral science, even though it was recognized as full-blown communist right from the get-go. How did it become neutral? also came to be seen as the most effective way to eradicate polio. And it's also coincidentally the same public health, the same mass vaccinations that are still today being pushed for the eradication, quote unquote, of whatever pathogen, whatever virus is pandemicking, I guess, right? Eastern European trials and mass vaccination methods, not to mention gender and ethnic equities. European trials and the mass vaccination methods, not to mention gender and ethnic equities, applied in communist countries make reference points in scientific discussion on the safety and efficacy of the Sabin vaccine. So these trials, these recognized communist mass vaccination methods, okay, applied in communist countries became the reference points in scientific discussions on safety and efficacy of the Sabin trial. So you can't separate the efficacy, the safety and efficacy that was deemed to be applicable to the Sabin vaccine. You cannot separate that safe and effective determination from the communism that determined it, from the communism that implemented it, from the communism that determined it. The mass vaccination strategies developed in Hungary, Cuba, and later in Brazil became models for the global polio eradication program of the World Health Organization, is documented right here by this woman. I'm not making this shit up. And I know that I'm going a long way around on this because in my mind, I'm kind of just, I wanted to research all this because I saw it. I could see through the documentations of the academic literature and stuff that this was the case. And I had to research a lot of different places, and I didn't want to just have one source or this source or that source. I wanted to have multiple sources that documented the same history. And this is a history that, a communist history of public health. It's the documented communist history that was recognized as communist history when it was happening. The whole epidemiology, the whole mass vaccinology, the whole systems approach. Yeah. See, the Eastern European trials and mass vaccination methods, not to mention gender and ethnic equities, applied in communist countries became reference points in scientific discussions on the safety and efficacy of the Sabin vaccine. What's this gender? Let's see what we got here. The East-West collaboration across the Iron Curtain against polio epidemics, Soviet engagement with global health and poliomyelitis vaccine. I kept saying poliomeningitis in yesterday's show. It's poliomyelitis. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why. I was pronouncing that the main vaccinologist or virologist or microbiologist that was leading that Russian crew against the tick-borne encephalitis too. I don't know. If I get to it, I'll tell you his right name. But anyways, the East-West collaboration. Okay, this was written in 2023. Okay. The eradication of polio has often been portrayed as an American story since the heroes who invented the first polio vaccines, the primary weapon against this disease, were American medical scientists and health administrators. Oh, let me see. Kind of have. Okay, let me see. Gender. Let me see. Okay. In February 56, science mission of the United States composed of 5 American scientists working in microbiology, epidemiology, and preventative medicine traveled to the Soviet Union. See, in 56, the Soviets came here with Chumakov and his wife, right? Later in the same year, a mission went the other way, to the Soviet Union. Right. During the visit, the scientists visited medical institutions based in Moscow, such as the Soviet Ministry of Health, Academy of Medical Sciences, Central Institute of Epidemiology and Microbiology, named after whoever, Institute of Organization of Public Health and History of Medicine. And in addition, they toured institutions located in Leningrad and several other places, including the State Institute of Experimental Medicine, and a lot of these different places in Moscow or whatever. Let me see what they got here. The State Institute of Vaccines in Syria, named after whoever. The Anti-Plague Institute. American scientists were given a guided tour and attended conferences. The American scientists were also invited to friendly teas organized by Volks, the Soviet Public Diplomacy Organization. The Soviet hosts shared their research with the American scientists and informed them about the Soviet healthcare and medical training system. The American scientists were introduced to a number of male and female researchers from the different gender and ethnic backgrounds, including Zinaida Yormoleva, I don't know, a Soviet microbiologist of Don Cusick origin, who headed the Department of Microbiology in Central Postgraduate Medical Institute. Several other people. The Soviet state saw the United States. Oh, wait a minute. An epidemiologist originally from Tashkent, who headed the laboratory of viral encephalitis of the Institute of Virology. In fact, the Public Health Service report observed the several laboratories were staffed by a female majority in the Soviet Union. The Soviet state saw the United States visit as an opportunity for showcasing gender and equality alongside scientific achievements in Soviet society. So the whole thing was a propaganda move. Of course, it was during the Cold War. The whole thing, it wasn't all, for the best thing of humanity. It was a platform for Soviet propaganda on their behalf, at least on their side, probably our side too. But it wasn't the American system. It wasn't America's founding principles that came to be the envy of the world. It was the communism, the top-down command and control communism that did. This is where we're at. Overall, the American scientists were cordially received by Soviet counterparts. The American virologists were particularly impressed by the massive immunization programs for epidemic control, which he thought was only one of the Soviet medical programs from which we have something to learn. Upon returning home, the American scientists recommended the U.S. government to take all appropriate steps to develop channels of communication between the medical scientists of the Soviet Union and the United States by exchange of literature, materials, and personnel. The U.S.-USSR medical missions paved the way for continuous communications between the scientific community in the United States and USSR in the summer of 1956. Yeah. Let's see. What else? In 1956, missions also instigated a lasting collaboration and personal friendship between Mikhail Chumakov and Albert Sabin that ultimately laid the foundation for global polio eradication. Around the time Chumakov's delegation arrived in the United States, Sabin was seeking an opportunity to conduct a large-scale field trial and distribution opportunity for his live polio virus. But you kind of get the gist. The whole point of that I wanted to show you this article was that they had gender equity rolled into this, and the Chinese had what they call barefoot doctors. They pushed a lot what they call the barefoot doctors, which were mostly women, that they put out into different societies and stuff. And they used it because, China was all adopting all this shit too. They adopted the Lysenkoism. They adopted pretty much everything that Russia was doing. And they saw this, whole Lysenkoism and the virology that results from this kind of a top-down command and control public health as a great leap forward for the country. All right. Anyways, so gender and ethnic equities are just rolled into it for propaganda opportunities for the world to see, right? The mass vaccination strategies developed in Hungary, Cuba, and later in Brazil. I think India was part of it too. They mentioned India and several other countries in this as well, in this literature. Maybe not this particular article, but in the literature of this Cold War thaw and vaccinology and epidemiology and polio. The long-term effect of Eastern European states' role in live virus vaccine development and disease elimination carried the legacies of how communist states worked and the way in which they were imagined over the boundaries of Europe and beyond the Cold War to global epidemic management strategies of the present. I'm going to read that to you the way it is there. Mass vaccination strategies developed in Hungary, Cuba, and later in Brazil became models for the global polio eradication program of the World Health Organization. Became the envy of the world. Then they were adopted by the world. The long-term effects of Eastern European states' role in the live virus vaccine development and disease elimination carried the legacies of how communist states worked in a way in which they were imagined, over the boundaries of Europe and beyond the Cold War to global epidemic management strategies of the present. So this is a historian saying, the present epidemic strategies, public health strategies, mass vaccination strategies are all of communist origin. That now represents the neutral science, right? See, this is the documentation. This is the documentation coming from a humanities professor, not an anti-communist. She's not warning us; they're bragging about it, Also, another article of this lady, this Vera Varga, Socialist Utopia in Practice, Everyday Life and Medical Authority in a Hungarian Polio Hospital. Now, we all have gone over several times what was going on in Hungary at the time, right? And this article came out in, September of 2014. Okay. All published literature. Summary is based on oral history interviews and medical literature, hospital newsletters, memoirs, and news media. This article explores the ways in which ideals of socialism interacted with medical practices in polio care in the 1950s Hungary. Through the everyday life of polio hospitals, it argues that the specific care that polio demanded from hospital staff, parents, and children resonated with the state socialist political discourses of gender equality. right? And the breakdown of class barriers and conventional hierarchies in medicine. Now we got the fundamental transformation of medicine. We're going to be going to that socialist medicine. This is an example of what we could be doing. We have more polio because we're a capitalist society. We have less polio because we're a communist society. Remember, I went over that yesterday in the last show we did. Yeah. So, this article argues that the specific care that polio demanded from the hospital staff, parents, and children resonated with state socialist political discourses of gender equality and the breakdown of class barriers and conventional hierarchies in medicine. You got to remember, Marx saw and puts it out there that we're a class society, like a layer cake society, we're all the different classes. Class. Providing opportunities as much as failing to fulfill expectations of patients, parents, and medical staff, polio care simultaneously created socialist utopias and demonstrated the limits of political ideals. Simultaneously created socialist utopias and demonstrated the limits of it. The hospitals in socialist utopia, a hospital as a socialist utopia during COVID, when the hospitals issued top-down command and control central protocols, what do you think they just came up with that out of thin air? You think they just came up with that idea when the federal government put it out there to monetize compliance to central protocols? Right? You think they just came up with that? Finally, a hospital exclusively specialized on the disease, the Heinemann Hospital, opened in late 1956. The treatment, hospital stay and equipment, leg braces, respiratory devices, shoes, etc., were provided by the state. Without charge to the patients and their families. This was a crucial point in how the socialist state imagined itself in the public health system it aimed to build. Polio hospitals and wards in Hungary, such as the Heinemann Hospital, I don't know how you pronounce that, could be understood as total institutions. Kind of, Indian people today, American Indian people today have schools, inclusion, they call them schools, where you go there and the only thing you speak is your native language. Everything happens there. Wells College here, local Wells College, which is now closed. They had a French house, and whenever you took courses, they were immersion. I guess they call it immersion. They had a French house where all the students taking French went there. That's all you spoke was French. They still call it the French house. Well, I think they might have renamed it now, but it used to be called the French house. Like immersion, that's what it is. So you have the treatment, hospital stay and equipment, leg braces, respiratory devices, shoes, etc. were all provided by the state free of charge, without charge to the patients or their families. This was a crucial point in how socialist states imagined itself and the public health system it aimed to build. Polio hospitals and wards in Hungary, such as this hospital, could be understood as total institutions or immersions, right? A concept put forward by sociologist Irving Kaufman that very much resonates with the ideas of totalitarianism. He's a sociologist. What do we know about sociology? The same sociology that they teach today. It was coined by a guy by the name of who? Auguste Comte. Sociology is the queen of all sciences. The queen of all sciences, the queen of all knowledge. It's the filter through which the central planners decipher what, if any, aspect of any other science, math, biology, law, any other science. They filter it through sociology, And the planners get to determine what, if any aspect, if it's going to be utilized, whatever best benefits the needs of the planners at the time, right? Subject to change according to the needs of the planners at any future time. And that will be utilized towards the evolution of human society towards its eventual end of humanity's eventual end as a single global human organism. Right? That's sociology. So it's a concept put forward by sociologists. Once you say sociologists, it's the top-down command and control society that demands a central plan and central planners, elites. Right? That's what sociology is. They teach it today. They teach that whole command and control. Society is an organism. Humanity is an organism. An organism. They call it functionalism. Some kind of functionalism. Some kind of societal functionalism or something like that. Maybe I'll think of the rest of it in a minute. But this was a crucial point in how socialists the socialist state imagined itself and the public health system that aimed to build. Okay, there was a concept put forward by sociologist Irving Goffman that very much resonated with the ideas of totalitarianism. A total institution of totalitarian communist state would be an unsurprising and straightforward frameworks of analysis in a hospital secluded from the rest of society where young patients spent a considerable amount of time. Okay, they got this applied in communist countries, became reference points in the scientific discussion on the safety and efficacy of the Sabin vaccine. I got this double starred right here. Okay. Per historyofvaccine.org, poliomyelitis. Okay. This is historyofvaccines.org. Okay. Per that, unlike the Salk trials of 1954 in the United States, the trial of Sabin's vaccine used no unvaccinated control groups. So there was no control groups. There was no placebos. There were nothing, right? I don't know. I don't know about the placebo things, but I just right there. Unlike the Salk trials of 1954 in the United States, the trial of Sabin vaccine used no unvaccinated control group. So there was nothing to compare it to. They just deemed it effective, right? Yeah. Just wanted to point that out. Not only has gender equality been rolled into the centralized socialist polio mass vaccination policy narratives from the beginning, but the socialism of the Green New Deal as the centralized cure for the climate change caused by capitalism has been rolled into it as well. In the article below, note the pro-communist stance against the communism, and central science of Lysenkoism, and the protection of his namesake and related quackery. The projection of his namesake and the related quackery of what Lysenkoism is supposed to be onto not only Trump, but more specifically and importantly America in general, our republic, and the individualism of free market capitalism. Okay. The article below, note the pro-communist stance against the communism of Lysenkoism. They're creating a false argument. They're creating a false or a very limited spectrum of debate about what Lysenkoism is or isn't wholly within the context of communism. So if you take a side against the genetics of Lysenkoism or for the genetics of, whether you go with Mendelian genetics or Lysenko, Lamarckian genetics, that argument, both sides of the argument are wholly within the context of communism, of collectivism, of public health, right? I got this MAHB, MAHB, and let me see. Yeah, I got this picture here. I don't know if I can get this any bigger so that you can actually... Let me see. Can I get it? Comes out of Stanford University. I mean, that's got to tell us a little something right there, right? Got to cover up my lantern, my Liberty lantern, to get this in there so you can see it. The human predicament. You know, this is it right here. You've got, let's see what we got. The human predicament in the middle. At the top, inequity. Okay, this is inequity. Land use degradation. Social and environmental injustice. Ocean acidification. Growth-based economic systems. It's capitalism, right? Loss of biodiversity. Climate disruption. Threats to human health, land use change, resource wars, overconsumption, overpopulation, global toxification, and fragile financial system, and fossil fuel dependency. This is this is it. Use the slider to explore a sustainable world, it says. This is how we get to explore the sustainable world. Okay. I don't know. I'll put this back over here. Oops. I'll put this back over here. Okay. So it says, an initiative of Stanford University bringing the best science to civil society, the Millennium Alliance for Humanity and the Biosphere. That's what that MAHB is. The Millennial Alliance for Humanity and the Biosphere. There it is. An initiative of Stanford University. Okay. And then down here I've got a 2017 article, When Political Fantasy Trumps Scientific Fact. When Political Fantasy Trumps Scientific Fact. It's this article here, 17. Julian Cribb is the author. That's out of Stanford. Okay, that's also Stanford. During the 1930s, around 10 million Russians and Ukrainians starved to death in a horrific event known as Holodomor. Holodomor. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation of that, but they I think they might be referring to the Great Famine over there, right? The Stalin's Great Famines, or the Great Famines that were happening. I don't know if Stalin or Lenin, but during the 1930s, around 10 million Russians and Ukrainians starved to death in a horrific event known as Holodomor. Holodomor? Not sure how I pronounce that. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Historians have attributed this disaster in part to the quack theories of Trofim. I don't know how you pronounce his first name either. Lysenko. Okay, they attribute it. This is one of my other key points too. Is they attribute all this famine, all these deaths, all this starvation that was happening to Lysenko, to the quackery of Lysenkoism, which Stalin, kind of mandated became the official Marxist genetics of the Soviet Union, of the Communist Party, right? And here he says, historians have attributed this disaster in the big part, to the quack theories of Lysenko, Stalin's hand-picked boss of Soviet agricultural science, which is, like I said, my point exactly. Okay, I'm trying to show that in literature today, you're going to find this guy being blamed for a lot of that shit, right? My point exactly. As we know, the science of Lysenkoism is wholly synonymous with Marxism. As we know, the science of Lysenkoism, the genetics of Lysenkoism, is wholly synonymous with Marxism. As I've shown in the past few shows, I've gone over the academic literature that points to it. All right? As is the punctuated equilibrium of Stephen Jay Gould, right? The punctuated equilibrium that kind of takes the biological evolution, the Darwinian biological evolution, and applies it to, it justifies the social, the environmental, the social aspect, and basically you can't have a gradual evolution, especially in social applications. If you want revolution, if you're pushing for revolution, you have to have that punctuated equilibrium. You have to have that jump, that snap, that from the old system to the new system, which revolution is. Right? That's all part of evolution now, because evolution, biological evolution, has to support and back up and reaffirm Marxist literature, communist propaganda, communist philosophy. You know, this is where we are with everything. Everything that we know about everything has to back up and confirm the collectivism, top-down command and control of Marxist communism, any collectivism. The very spirit of Marxist theory, Lysenko claimed, called for a theory of species formation which would entail revolutionary leaps, like I was saying. Lysenko attacked Mendelian genetics, gene-based, and Darwinian evolution as a theory of gradualism. They can't have that kind of gradualism, even though there's all kinds of revolutionary communist gradualists. I mean, Antonio Gramsci's slow walk across culture, or whatever he called it. And then you had the Fabian socialists. They were all gradualists, you know, beating the forge and molding the world according to their heart's desire, one step at a time or whatever, right? But in revolution, socialist revolution, there's got to be that. They can't just be gradual. We gotta make it happen. You know, so there's got to be this punctuated equilibrium. Okay, so now watch how the actual Marxism and Marxist or origins of Lysenkoism gets flipped as to be tactically projected onto the alleged right-wing politics of the so-called enlightened democracies of the West, namely America and Australia, in this article. Okay, I wanted to point this out. We're back here. Historians have attributed disaster of starvation and all this to Lysenko. This is a pro-communist argument against the communism of Lysenko, because what they're saying is that it's what America are the new Lysenkos. America is the new Lysenkoism. It's out there. And this is it. It was a disastrous case of political distorting the objectivity of science. Lysenkoism, of course, they're saying, was a disastrous case of politics distorting the objectivity of science for its own end. Today, Lysenkoism, the deliberate suppression of science by politics, is alive and kicking, not in totalitarian states, but in supposedly enlightened democracies such as the United States and Australia. It's right there. They're flipping it. They're flipping it. See, the Marxism, communism, totalitarian collectivism, top-down command and control collectivism that established Lysenkoism as the, official genetics, to the point that they were chasing down anybody who argued against it, right? And imprisoning people that were arguing against it, or whatever else they needed to do. It might even have been freaking offing them, I don't know. But if you came out against Lysenkoism, you were coming out against the communist state. You were coming out against the Communist Party and against the Soviet Union and against Stalin. Okay. That's a picture of Lysenko right there. In its course, scientists in both countries are now being purged, intimidated, their funding axed, their institutions dismembered, and their findings suppressed, all because the objective scientific evidence they discovered doesn't support the political delusions of the ruling elites and their corporate masters. Can you see how it's getting flipped on its ear? Now, of course, the objective science today, the objective science that they're referring to from the climate that proves the global warming, right, and the sustainable development that justifies net zero, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050, the redistributive justice of human rights, the 17 sustainable development goals, of course, the Equator Principles, and any other world socialist tenets that you want to roll into that. That's objective science. Kind of in the same way that the communism of the polio mass vaccinations came to represent the neutral science of communism. Same shit today. It's the same shit. No progress. We are exactly where we were then now. I don't know. It's crazy. The method is simple. Shoot the messenger. In the case of Lysenko, some 3,000 Russian biologists, included the great Nikolai Vavilov, were persecuted, purged, and forced to recant their science, sent to the gulag, or in some cases actually shot. Like I said. Today, public-spirited scientists in America and Australia are being purged. Okay, all the scientists drinking the communist Kool-Aid, right, of climate change, global warming, sustainable development, and all the other things that I just named off, right? They're what's up, Meat P? What's up, kid? Meat P's growing. Something's got her going. They were all, yeah. Today, the publicly spirited scientists in America and Australia, the publicly spirited scientists, publicly spirited, the collective, the ones that have rolled in the communism and Marxism and collectivism into their science. What? Now, supposedly, America, Australia are the Lysenkos. And they're rejecting the science, the objective science, with the intrinsic world socialism of the climate change narrative, right? Sustainable development narrative, human rights narrative, One Health narrative, right? It's being ignored by the Lysenkos now. Yeah. Today, these public-spirited scientists, the ones drinking the communist Kool-Aid in America and Australia, are being purged for similar reasons, for speaking out about the evidenced truths of science in the face of right-wing politics which denies those truths and wants them stamped out. Yeah, for speaking out against the evidenced truth of science in the face of right-wing politics which denies those truths and wants them stamped out. So, if you're pushing back against the communism of Lysenkoism, or the communism of climate change, or, sustainable development, or redistributive justice and human rights and One Health, the same communism that spawned Lysenkoism, the same Marxism that spawned Lysenkoism, right? If you're denying that science that spawned Lysenkoism, you're a Lysenko. You're now the contemporary Lysenkoist. What's up, kid? Are you extorting your father again? Come here, kid. Come on. Take it easy. Come on, get up in there. Relax. Minnie P, she gets going a little crazier. Probably heard the cat or something down there. Chicken's laying eggs. She'll make her go crazy. But you see what I'm saying? Everything's getting flipped. The script is getting flipped here. And if you're not aware of the history, what wherewithal would you have to argue against it? What wherewithal would you have to know the bullshit that this really is? You know? In the U.S., Trump is in the process of, one, drastic cuts to science funding, two, placing his own Lysenkos at the head of federal key agencies and departments. Abandoning U.S. commitment to world plans to limit greenhouse emissions, revoking Obama's measures to prepare America for climate change, applying political censorship to the public science statements of government departments and agencies, and deleting public advice about climate change and U.S. carbon emissions from government websites. Not really. As we just saw, they're all bought onto the One Health. They're all bought into sustainable development. They're all bought into the world socialist narrative to one degree or another. Yet there is being said here, well, they've they're doing all these things. His main instrument of enforcing a $7 billion cut to the science budget affecting climate science, environmental, or renewable energy research. Make no mistake, these numbers would be crippling to much of the federal science apparatus. Matt Harahan, director of the budget and policy at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, commented. Of course, they got the guy from the Science American Association for the Advancement of Science on there throwing his weight behind this, right? To give credence to it. But if you remember from a few shows that I've done, I already did a show on this, that would be the same AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, and leftist, communist, human rights, world socialist affiliated and known Soviet front group that I've gone over before. In this show right here, intellectual property versus no human right to the patent protection. The United Nations determined that there is no right to patent protection, no different than they've determined that there is no such thing as a right to self-defense. No human right to self-defense, right? I'm just trying to show this stuff. It's out there, you know? Lysenkoism was the manifestation of a Soviet political delusion that ended up costing millions of lives. So now these pro-communist people want to separate themselves from Stalin. You know. And they want to separate themselves from the communism of Stalin and the communism of Lysenkoism. Lysenkoism was the manifestation of a Soviet political delusion that ended up costing millions of lives. The historical irony is that the same sort of irrational, ideologically based delusions has now captured Australia's Liberal and America's Republican parties. There it is. You know, but why wouldn't all these leftist, progressive, communist philosophies and agendas be accepted on the right and in the Republican parties now in America, when you go onto social media and you can just see that they're almost exclusively almost exclusively, wholesale represented by former leftist, fake right people espousing to be right-wing. So now you've got a leftist right-wing espousing leftist philosophies, collectivist philosophies, communist, world socialist philosophies, fighting against. I don't. But why wouldn't they adopt that Lysenkoism? But the thing about Lysenko is that what else was going? They blame a lot of this shit on Lysenko. He's up there in front. He's like the punching bag of left and right against this, and he gets blamed for a lot of the starvation and shit. But there was a lot of other shit going on out there. The reason why people starved to death, it wasn't just because of Lysenko or Lysenkoism. It was because of communism, of which Lysenkoism was just a part of, the world socialism of which Lysenkoism was just an aspect of. I mean, you had the whole Eastern Bloc was essentially imprisoned under the guns of the Red Army, and anybody pushing back was squashed under the guns of the Red Army all through the 1950s. Probably there was revolution pretty much from the 1900s all the way up and through the 1950s and 60s. I mean, when was China's revolution? Same shit, right? As if Lysenko was the only reason those millions were murdered by the same Soviet communist policies. Essentially, Lysenko or Lysenkoisms have become the politically, academically, and scientific scapegoats to fly cover for the Marxist communism that defines it. Like I said, this Lysenkoism have become the politically, academically, and scientific scapegoats. And if you look at this, right, the politics, which is government, academics, and science, okay, you've got the triple helix, the application of socialism or the underlying socialism, collectivism, applicable to evolutionary sciences, right? Which would include the punctuated equilibrium of sudden shifts from revolution. All Marxist, all collectivist, all communist, all world socialist. And, this collectivism, it's all of collectivism, not just communism. All of collectivism, it's intrinsic to anarchist doctrine, which is collectivist in nature for most part. Nationalist, socialism, everything. Humanism, it's all the same collectivism. All the same world socialism eventually, even nationalism. Because you got to remember the nationalism, the collectivism, the world socialism of nationalism in the dialectal. And that Hegelian dialectal, they're just, they're going to eventually fight it out to see who's the ultimate synthesis there. So it's all the same shit. You buy into the nationalism of socialism, and what you're buying into is still a more slow step into that world socialism, just an additional step into it. Meanwhile, the very centralized top-down command and control policies, protocol, and coerced, even simultaneous mass vaccinations intrinsic to both Lysenkoism and the collectivism of population and or public health of that very same Marxist communism have since not only been adopted by governments, science, and academia, again the triple helix, the world over, including not only the United Nations and the WHO, human rights NGOs, etc., but the U.S. as well. And I've showed you. With diseases like polio and related mass vaccinations, eradications, programs, eradications being that communism again, right? with diseases like polio and related mass vaccination / eradication programs across Eastern Bloc countries. Communist public health, defined by its top-down command and control over everything and everybody at all times, became the envy of the world's technocratic elite. Oh man, can you imagine what we could do? That's what came to be the neutral science, right? Came to represent the neutral science only a few years later. I got this from the Wellcome Trust. Polio across the Iron Curtain, Hungary's Cold War with an epidemic. This also from that same Varga. Okay. Also from the same Varga. Chapter 5. Chapter 5, okay. 2018 again. In December 1959, Hungary became one of the first countries in the world to begin nationwide mass vaccinations with the polio vaccine. We've gone over that. This campaign put Hungary at the front line of polio vaccination, along with the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, where Sabin vaccine was tested. The Hungarian model of annual intensive mass vaccination campaigns became one of the bases on which the WHO built its global strategy of polio eradication in the late 20th century. I'm going to... Where are we? Let me see where we are here. Nope, I gotta go down one. Yeah. That's it right there. I mean, right there. The Hungarian model of annual intensive mass vaccination campaigns became one of the bases on which the World Health Organization built its global strategy of polio eradication in the late 20th century. I'm not making this shit up. You know, I'm just... The development and implementation of the live polio virus vaccine in Hungary is in many ways as an unusual Cold War story, one in which the scientists all over the world, among them American and Soviet researchers, worked together and shared results that led to the immunization of millions of children in the national mass vaccination programs. The country's choices to introduce the new vaccine were largely shaped by the relations between the national public health structures, the government and its infrastructure, and the vaccines, which in turn were mostly determined by being part of the capitalist or communist regime. The country's choices to introduce the new vaccine were largely shaped by the relations between the national public health structure, the government and its infrastructure, and the vaccines, which in turn were mostly determined by being part of the capitalist or communist regime. And the exceptional quality of the scientific exchange between Sabin and Chumakov was that it resulted in a tangible product that would be widely used and considered successful in both East and the West. The polio vaccine used today in eradication efforts. Yeah, seen in both East and the West, the polio vaccine used today in the eradication efforts. All right. The cooperation led to the largest field trial in the history of polio, which I already said that it was, but this is the academic literature saying the same. involving over 16.5 million people across the Soviet Union. As soon as Sabin finished selecting the optimal strain for creating the vaccine, he sent samples to Smordnostov in Leningrad. Field trials with the strain started in 1957 on a very small scale with the vaccination of 67 children. Started with 67 children. This number gradually grew to 150, then to 2010, and finally to 20,000 in 1958, parallel to Smordnostov's trials. Another field trial initiated by Chumakov, then director of the Poliomyelitis Research Institute in Moscow, took off in greater proportions. Chumakov asked Sabin to send him the greatest possible amount of the vaccine for testing and producing. Sabin sent enough to vaccinate 300,000 children. Chumakov started the trial with 20,000, and following the initial success, was able to conduct the largest field trial to date in the history of polio vaccines. By the end of 1959, over 15 million people spanning 14 republics. I think we kind of went over this part here. Yeah, we kind of went over this part here. Yeah, the Soviet minister, in 1959, 15 million people spanning 14 republics. The Soviet Union's Minister of Health issued an order 16th December 59. Then I went over what was going on in Hungary. At that time, the suppression of the whole Hungarian nation under Stalin and his puppet, or under, not Stalin, but the Soviet Union and their puppet that was in control, right? They suppressed a revolution there in 1956 and then began mass vaccinations in 1959, and Hungary became the first country. Again, we see the Rockefeller Foundation involved. Many further ties were established in the interwar era. The Rockefeller Foundation had a significant role in setting up public health institutions and providing fellowships for study in the United States for researchers and public health officials in both countries. Rockefeller Foundation. Cold War fault lines between 26th of August 17th and October 1959. Horseman, that's that World Health Organization person, right? She visited Poland, Czechoslovakia, and several republics of the Soviet Union to gather information on site about the vaccine trials. The WHO delegate voiced overall satisfaction in her report on the Soviet Union. She saw no reason to doubt the level of surveillance of polio cases. Horseman did admit that it was difficult to say how effective the vaccine was since many of the subjects had previously received the Salk vaccine and little time had elapsed since the trial to draw definite conclusions. If skepticism about the Russian results was rooted in Cold War ideas of the East, Horseman's report used a very similar set of tools to dissolve doubts and validate those same results. She drew upon two powerful notions that were connected to communist countries: the centralized totalitarian state and its submissive citizens. Horseman highlighted the role of the centralized and state-operated public health systems in successfully organizing such a trial. A critical difference between the East and the West that was frequently mobilized in Cold War rhetoric on both sides. The scope and magnitude of the live poliovirus vaccines programs are a type of peculiarly fitted to the manner in which the medical profession is organized under the ministries of health in these countries. For such mass programs, it is necessary to have a medical service organized almost on a military basis, particularly from the epidemiologic, surveillance, and public health standpoint. In the Soviet case, a state and healthcare system that was centrally controlled from top to bottom could at once be capable of organizing a project on a mass scale and at the same time of vouching for rigor and scrutiny that was expected from such a scientific trial. This implied Horstman's report was the upside of a totalitarian communist regime, public health, the upside of a totalitarian communist regime. Yeah, I'll make that the title of this show. All right. I mean, this I've touched on this before, but it's in the flow here. Driving the point home. You know, the success of the Sabin vaccine in Hungary became a reoccurring example of the superiority of socialism. The success in Hungary, right, where the communization of Hungary was continuing under the Soviet puppet, right, in the 1950s. This narrative was reinforced by the government through newspapers as well. 7 years after the vaccination began, Vilmos Kapos, director of the Budapest Public Health and Epidemiology Station, still felt it necessary to make a remark on the international significance of the Sabin vaccine in an internal party meeting in 1966. The social implications, the social determinants, the social implications of the fight against epidemic disease are demonstrated by the fact that while in socialist countries the occurrence of polio could be reduced to the minimum with the use of the free and effective Sabin vaccine, the result of capitalist countries due to economic problems do not come even close to this. The promotion of top-down command and control public health. Mass vaccinations, which they say is going to eradicate these epidemics that are endemic, right? The Hungarian success in polio vaccination was thus celebrated as a triumph of an entire system of political ideology and the economic structure. The Hungarian success in polio vaccination was thus celebrated as the triumph of an entire system of political ideology, welfare, and economic structure of communism. It became the ultimate proof of the superiority of communist values and its system, and the systems approach of public health. And we have the systems approach of critical theory still at work today, being implemented today to criticize all the other systems. Not just our public health systems, our criminal justice systems. You know, our capitalist systems. This ideological role of polio prevention was not unique to Hungary. Czechoslovakian scientists and public health officials chose to emphasize their own contribution to vaccine development and the role of communist states in the project. You know, the communism that came to represent the neutral science only a few short years later, right? Since the 1950s, Sabin has been seen as a great friend to the people and politics of Eastern Europe. Yeah, Sabin. And subsequently, his Americanness has diminished. So they don't recognize him over there. He's not an American. His Americanness is diminished. Yeah. The Sabin vaccine has been incorporated into the Eastern European identity to the extent that today a number of Hungarians who grew up during the communist era believe that Sabin was in fact Russian. I think he was born there. Despite the erasure of the Eastern European history of live polio virus, despite the erasure of Eastern European history in live polio vaccine development, this socialist history should be taken into account when considering 20th century epidemics, international and global public health and eradication programs. Yes. Wholeheartedly agree with that. This socialist history, this communist, socialist, top-down and command and control history of what defines public health today needs to be taken, should be taken into account when considering 20th century epidemics, international and global public health eradication programs. We need to understand that when they're implementing these things, they're implementing the world socialism, the world communism, the top-down and command and control collectivism from which it was spawned. My point exactly. That's my whole point of doing these past half a dozen shows and probably the next 3 or 4 shows. I don't know. Once I get down through this, I got some more information to bring to you on this. Countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union were not only sites of scientific and technological innovation. There's an innovation word, right? Just in the West. Countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union were not only sites of scientific and technological innovation, just in the West. Virological work was embarked in a particular political ideology of what health was. Yeah. Going back to the tick-borne encephalitis that Chumakov was a part of back in the 1930s, right? Where that spawned the whole concept of how when they isolated the 29 strains of encephalitis, I don't know, in a matter of days or weeks or something, right? A few days. And how everything is premised on that we know in vaccinology, virology, epidemiology, the nidality, and One Health, and what they call One Medicine, then One Health, right? I'm telling you. Yeah. Virology, not just as in the West. Virological work was embedded. The virological work was embedded in the particular political idea of what health was, who was responsible for it, and how access to it should be distributed. Oh, there's going to be a push for universal health care there, right? Similarly to the ways in which particularly American ideas played a substantive part in the development of and trials with the Salk vaccine. The Sabin vaccine itself is inseparable from the political, social, and cultural context in which it was developed and tested in Eastern Europe. The Salk vaccine. The Sabin vaccine itself is inseparable from the political, social, and cultural context in which it was developed and tested in Eastern Europe. It's inseparable from the communism, the top-down and command and control public health that launched its global popularity. And the narratives of emergent pandemics, right? And, of course, eradication narratives. As we have seen in previous chapters, political decisions and scientific assessments regarding disease prevention shaped the development and introduction of the Sabin vaccine and were based on experiences on a very local level. These socialist political and social structures in turn had a tremendous effect on the global polio eradication programs of the later 20th and 21st centuries, which is where we are today. I'm going to leave this show off here. Wait a minute. The global push for population public health as a result of polio mass vaccinations, polio health, socialization of health. What is public health as per classic definition by C.E. Wilson. This is the guy, when you Google public health, what is public health? They come up with this C.E. Wilson guy's definition with back in 1920. He just said public health is the science and art of preventing disease, prolonging life, and promoting health through the organized efforts and informed choices of society, organizations, public and private, communities, and individuals. This is untilled fields of public health. That's kind of the quote that they go to, right? Yeah, his untilled fields of public health. And we'll get into more of what the public health and how it's seen and what it's become, commonly known as and commonly accepted of. Surprisingly absent. I mean, how many people are aware when they see public health authorities, public health agencies, public health policies? How many people are aware of the communism, top-down command and control, totalitarian top-down command and control that is implicit, intrinsic, and inherent to what that public health actually is, to what the whole of disease eradication is, to that got lost with polio. Polio was what helped launch public health as we know it today. Public health. Polio is what helped launch, and the vaccines and the mass vaccinations and eradications. It's what helped launch the world socialism, communism of public health as we know it today. Just putting this out there for your consideration so that you can have it. I mean, it's documented. They're bragging about it. This woman that we were just reading her articles from, this humanities, medical humanities professor and socialist pushing Ukraine, or socialist pushing UK and Germany. Academia. They're bragging. And I'm just trying to point it out so that we can all be aware of what these small circles of academics are bragging about. It's there. All we got to do is see it and understand it for what it is. A methodical deconstruction of the West. Western free world as we knew it, it's pretty much gone. It's a methodical deconstruction of America, America's founding principles, America's founding republic, limited form of government. It's a revolution. It's a revolution against all that America was founded to be, our founding principles and everything that is enshrined in our Declaration of Independence as our founding principles, as our unalienable rights and liberty, and our whole constitutional republic. If we see it for what it is, that's what we'll understand it. Again, I hope you got something out of it today. I'm going to continue this. I'm going to continue giving you more documentation and reiterating here and there about what we're actually kind of putting out there. I've never seen anybody else put this out here before. I've never seen anybody make the correlation before outside these small circles of academics that are just bragging to each other. Look what we did. Man, the socialism, man, the communism, man. These people don't even realize, man, But anyways, I'm Joe Marshall. Thanks for stopping by the Liberty's Perspective today for this show, and I look forward to seeing you on the next show.